Thank you very much. I think it will be pretty difficult to follow Chris and Natalie. I mean, we are a very different type of company, right? We are not a dividend yield play. We are very much an event-driven company. So who is ATOME? So our focus is actually to look at how can we help decarbonize the food chain through fertilizer and low-carbon energy. And although we are UK listed, our first projects are in Latin America. So, I mean, you heard just now, clearly, there is growth in Latin America, in emerging markets. And the reason we are in Latin America for our first projects, these are the places where you have the lowest cost of energy, lowest cost of power, and the biggest demand for fertilizer products, right? So we're going to go through the presentation, despite going through the usual disclaimer. And we are a project developer. Right? ATOME was created at the end of 2021 and listed then. And we have a number of projects in the pipeline that we are maturing. And when we mature these projects, de-risk those projects, we bring us to investors to invest at the asset level, not at the PLC. And our first project is called Villeta. It's a 145 megawatt fertilizer project in Paraguay, and which will do about 260,000 tons a year of fertilizer. So we spent about 3 years maturing the project, de-risking the project. And how do you de-risk a project? Well, obviously, you sign the long-term power purchase agreement. You buy the land, you do the environment and social, you do the offtake, because you need to have a long-term offtaker that will buy your production, which allows you then to finance the project. And then after that, clearly, you bring private equity investors and debt investors into the asset level. To give you a sense of scale, a 145 megawatt project is about $465 million of capital expenditure. Clearly, we will never go to the market and to raise $465 million, and we will get into later on to explain how we go about it. From a time of scale, project number one, what does it mean? It's an EBITDA of about $70 million, assuming 2 days price of fertilizer and gray fertilizer, not assuming any gray premium, right? So we are not dependent on carbon credits. We are not dependent on green premium. This is the market of today that the market is ready to pay. And just earlier today, we announced also that we have created an arm called ATOME Power. So whilst we are working in geographies with a lot of existing power, what we have recognized as well as we were looking at building the pipeline of projects is that over time, there is more and more demand from power. I mean, everybody has heard about AI and the fact that even a single ChatGPT search uses nearly 40 more times power than a simple Google search. What we are seeing is more and more, a lot of these companies are also competing for power. Right? So we have built this internal expertise, and it's all about providing power for our projects and as well as other customers. Obviously, it starts with a team, and so what makes a successful project development team is to have complementary skills. And so personally, I started as a power engineer, then went to oil and gas, then went into banking, and my last job was at the World Bank at the International Finance Corporation for about 10 years. So I bring more of a financing angle within the team, and we have our chairman, Peter, who is also our largest shareholder. Who has, he comes originally from a lawyer, but he comes also from a background of creating companies, being chairman of EPC companies, because keeping track of cost is extremely important along the way. And then we overlay, obviously, the countryside, the fact that we have a very developed team in Paraguay, in Costa Rica, and these other markets. Terje Bakken, who is the head of fertilizer, and he is one of the most recognized experts globally, having been on the board of Eurochem, for example. And Marie-Rose from the International Energy Agencies. As you see on the bottom left, who are shareholders today. I mean, some of you in the room may be shareholders. But what you see in here is, for example, when you see the management represented, this is actually paid in capital. This is money we have personally put in at every single raise at the same share price as all of the other shareholders. And we've benefited from the support of Schroders, who has consistently increased their participation. Baker Hughes, as an industrial partner, it's one of the largest energy engineering companies globally, who has taken 6%. And Trafigura, which is one of the original shareholders. From a size point of view, clearly, you're developing company as a $25 million market cap when you're doing a $460 million project. That may seem ambitious, but actually, This is quite normal. I mean, you've seen it many times happen in oil and gas, for example, where you have small companies to develop big assets, and then you scale it up and eventually hive it off to a bigger player. So from our point of view, I mean, as I said earlier, you know, our market cap at the moment is relatively small. It's about 40p. And if you look at what we are looking about from an analyst estimate, you know, we're looking at about 160p per share on average. And that's basically looking at one project. Like, that's the value of one project that we can create. And what we have done, especially going through about bringing anchor investor into a project, is to have a recognition of that value today, and ensuring that basically, you know, we have line of sight that even though the project is only going to start producing cash in about 4 years' time, the reality is you bring that value forward as you are developing the project and putting it together for the market. And so, as an example, and we'll talk about it later, High24 came out into the project, taking a 50% participation in it, and attributing a net value back to ATOME for $60 million. So to give you a sense, we spent less than $20 million to develop the project to that stage. And for that $20 million, we're getting a recognition of about $60 million, right? And that's assuming a floor price. So obviously, if the price of fertilizer goes up, then that value will go up over time. And the whole idea is we copy-paste, right? But so to give you also the idea of, let's say, setting the scene, why is it, what is it that we are doing, and why is it important? Well, if you look on the graph on the right, you have in red what is called, you know, synthetic fertilizers, what is made from natural gas and from coal, where through the Haber-Bosch process, you basically separate the hydrogen from the hydrocarbons, you bring it into the Haber-Bosch process, you add nitrogen, and then you see that over the past 100 years, with the Haber-Bosch process, we've basically fed half of the world's population. In green, you have basically what is organic and also mined fertilizer, so, you know, obviously phosphates and so on. And what you see is that, yes, it's a growing portion, but it doesn't make up the difference. Like, we absolutely need that. If you can really think that half of this room would not be here today, would not be able to feed itself if it wasn't for what is today coming from fertilizer, from hydrocarbon-based fertilizer. And so with that, as I mentioned, coming from oil and gas and coal, you have about 5% of the global emissions which are due to that side of the fertilizer. However, the reality is we can make it using power and water, basically, you know, making green hydrogen. And so what we see is clearly we are increasingly dependent on hydrocarbon-based fertilizer. What I haven't quite mentioned is also on the security of supply, which is 30% of today's fertilizers come from Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, right? And it's a real problem. At the early start of the war of Ukraine, the price of fertilizer went up 4 times, and everybody became quite hostage. Today, even, you are at a price of fertilizer which is about twice the average of the average price of fertilizer over the past 15 years. So there was clearly a total change. So there's a question of food security. And if I have also to put it into another context, about 5 years ago, the UK used to produce about 1 million tons of nitrogen fertilizer from the North Sea. Today, it produces 0 because the government decided to prioritize North Sea gas towards power. So we are becoming increasingly dependent on fertilizer from abroad. From a carbon point of view, what we see, however, is that we have a number of groups which have made carbon commitments, and we're talking about, you know, Marks and Spencer, McCain, McDonald's, and so on. And the cheapest way for them to reduce their carbon footprint is not through taxes, right? It's actually by controlling the type of fertilizer that they get. And what this thing on the left shows is that, for example, for a cup of coffee, 40% of the carbon footprint of that cup of coffee comes from fertilizer, and yet going fully green only affects the price by less than 1%. So from the food companies, increasingly, they are getting in the value chain of fertilizer to basically force the farmers to use zero carbon fertilizer. But the whole trick, you are not asking the farmer to pay fertilizer at a premium. It is actually Nestlé who buys the fertilizer through Yara on behalf of the farmers so that they are able to produce a lower carbon fertilizer. But the important thing, as I mentioned also, is that in Latin America today, 95% of all fertilizer is imported. And clearly, if you can produce it at home for cheaper than the price of the import, you are in a very good position, forgetting the fact that you're getting a green premium out of it. So, as I mentioned earlier, the idea that what we are doing is we are doing a regular fertilizer plant, like that has been done for about 100 years. The only difference is that instead of using hydrocarbons, and hydrocarbon is CH4, where with a lot of heat you separate the C and the H to create hydrogen, is in here you basically use green hydrogen, so renewable power. You take H2O, with a lot of power you separate the H and the O. But the only way to make it very cheap is if you have a very competitive cost of power and base load power, i.e. hydroelectric power, which is why we are in Paraguay, where you have the second largest hydroelectric dam in the world, and in the region with Brazil and Argentina that pays the highest premium for fertilizer. So what we are doing here, there's no technological innovation. However, what we have is a development playbook innovation and a team that can deliver it in a way that is not done before and not done by the bigger players, because this is the type of and size of projects that they want other players to mature and then bring to the market. And so what have we done over the past three years? So we've signed a long-term power purchase agreement with ANDE, the utility. We've purchased the site. We've obviously have a number of project partners that go in here because the idea for us, as developers, we remain G&A light. This is absolutely the case. You know, we have a team of less than 15, but we rely on very big, very known partners like Casale. You know, Casale is one of the oldest ammonia licensor and fertilizer engineering company in the world. On Yara, which is part of ex-Norsk Hydro, which is one of the oldest fertilizer trader in the world. And interestingly enough, both Yara and Casale 100 years ago actually had electrolyzers running to make hydrogen, to make ammonia and fertilizer. And Natixis on the banking side and IDB Invest. So we have now fully permitted the project. We have finished the front-end engineering and design study, as well as the free trade zone. So we don't get subsidies from the government. You know, we don't believe in subsidies in the fact that they slow down your projects, and we have to be absolutely economical, right? A business that requires subsidy, it's not a business, like it's a charity, right? So we have to be competing head-on with the existing market and the advantages that we have. And now, on the last 4 events that remain until we reach final investment decision, we have now signed a fixed engineering and procurement contract with Casale at $465 million. Why is this significant? It means that now we have frozen the capex of the project. So the cost will never be higher than that. This is a guarantee from Casale. And if there's cost overrun, it is on their side and it's not on ours. And this is something which today is extremely difficult to get globally. I mean, you've seen a lot of inflation due to what happened during COVID, now due to the tariffs as well. Now this is completely fixed. And this is quite key because when you go and you talk to investors at the asset level, you know, they want to have a line of sight on returns and they need, you know, guarantees along the way, whether it's on the offtake, on the price of power, obviously on the capex of the project. So we have announced that we have the long-term offtake with Yara, which will take 100% of our production. Yara is, you know, is the second largest European company on fertilizers, and is one of the most active in Latin America as well. We will talk about the equity investment and as well as the debt side. So we are discussing with development finance institutions, so the European Investment Bank, the Dutch DFI, which is called FMO, the US Development Finance Corporation, and IFC. And you know, we heard a little bit earlier about the fact that interest rate has been a concern increasingly for a number of projects. Because these are development finance institutions, and we are talking about obviously food security and climate, they are able to offer us extremely attractive terms. We're talking, you know, nearly 15-year debt at under 3% plus SOFR. Right? So sulfur is the ex-LIBOR. And so it gives you an idea that actually, we are about twice better than what you would get if you're going in the normal market. If I go to the next one. So the most recent one that we did, it's the EPC agreement with Casale. So it obviously guarantees price, and it guarantees also time of delivery, so 38 months to FID. And that was on the back of doing about 2.5 years of engineering work with them to put together the project. And this is the first time in the world, any company included, big one, small one, you name it, that there is a fully green industrial scale fertilizer EPC signed. And clearly, they are standing behind it. For them, they see it an absolute key project. And they're really anchoring that side of the asset. I mentioned about the offtake. So we have negotiated and agreed the commercial heads of terms. Now we are on the finishing touches of a full agreement before we have the official signature. So what we are talking is 10-year plus, and giving us basically commercial protection, i.e., there's a floor price mechanism, which is obviously, fertilizer a commodity, prices go up and down. But what we have is protection from Yara on the downside. They will take 100% of the production, which obviously makes sure that the debt is always paid, so we don't have any risk as a project developer. And then there is basically an increasing sharing of value. So the higher price they get and they achieve on the offtake, the higher percentage basically they get as a margin. So they're really motivated to get the absolute highest price possible. The interesting thing also with Yara, it's a global company. And although we expect that the large majority of our fertilizer will be sold between Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina, the reality is for them, it is very easy to go and sell it into Europe, or actually just sell the carbon credit, quote unquote, or the green attribute. So we may sell physically the green will be sold in Brazil, but actually the green premium itself, the paper premium, will come, let's say, from Germany. And that's a great optionality that gives us. To give you a sense today, the green premium on calcium ammonium nitrate is anywhere between 20 to 100%. So it gives you a sense that really the market is moving, is changing extremely quickly. In our own base case projection, as I mentioned, we see that we are doing our numbers on the gray, but then clearly if we are able to capture more, an increasing share of the green premium, then that will come on top. And I mentioned earlier Hy24. So Hy24 is the largest, basically, industrial gases fund created back in 2021 as a JV with Ardian. So Ardian is one of the largest asset manager in the infrastructure sector. It's over $180 billion of assets under management. And with Hy24, they've raised 2 billion euros. Really dedicated to developing and to investing in projects like ours, right? So they are a strategic investor. They are not an operator. We will continue operating the asset, but they are quite important because obviously not only they will bring, anywhere between 100 to 115 million dollars. They will take a minimum of 50% of the asset, but they bring also the entire credibility into anchoring the asset, into making obviously the debt side more competitive. And so for the heads of term, as I mentioned, so obviously we are now in the finalizing stage of putting the equity club together with the terms, the commercial terms already agreed. And again, if there's a whole package being put together, that gets us to final investment decision and start of construction. And what was interesting for us is basically they gave us a compelling valuation. I mean, we run a process for about 6 months with the help of Natixis to find the best possible partners that will bring us the best pre-money valuation for Vieta for the work that we have done. So it's quite interesting in a way that, yes, I fully expect the question to come. What is going on where, you have a pre-money valuation of one asset of $60 million and your market cap is under $30 million? The market is the market, I guess. But it just shows you how we are building these things together, and then the intention is when we roll it out. So project number 2 will be in Iguazu, still in Paraguay, because our production of fertilizer represents less than 1% of the regional demand of fertilizer. So there's a huge amount of place for growth. In Costa Rica itself, right, there's an opportunity to copy-paste Villeta. So what takes us at the moment about 3 years to get to FID, we can deliver in between 18 months to 2 years to go and copy-paste and then repeat and grow from that. And as I mentioned earlier, we disclosed today that we were looking at also having basically a power as a service unit, because as we look at project 4, 5, and so on, the need to control more of your power and to lower the cost of power, because your margins comes from how low you can get the cost of power, comes also with the ability to go and optimize things. And as the cost of solar and the cost of battery storage continues to go lower, it's also an opportunity for us. At the moment, it's a totally no-cost opportunity. But for us, we wanted to announce it because clearly, it's not just about what we are doing. But if we can do things on the utility scale, that brings another side of the market. So from a timelines point of view, I think some of you who've been investor here for a while, have seen things shift, over the past month. Clearly, what we had to do is to de-risk significantly the PPA, the engineering, the offtake, the equity side, and do a lot more education, because as the market was getting tighter and tighter, they wanted more and more certainty. So we had to work extra hard to get to that more certainty, but it's also in exchange. Yes, it's taken more time, but it has enabled us to create more pre-money valuation on the other side. And I think with this, I run 1 minute of the time, so I'm happy to take Q&A.
What is the expertise you have with your EPC contractor on this project?
Excuse me, sorry?
The expertise of the EPC contractor.
So to give you a sense, Casale has been created since the 1920s. It is the oldest pure-play fertilizer engineering company in the world. It is the third one now on size after KBR and Fluor. So this plant will be number 300 as far as plant. The only innovation that we have is the size of the electrolyzer at the beginning, like about 100 megawatt of electrolyzers. Everything else, for them, this is just rolling out things that they've done before. And today, they're actually building a nitric acid or nitrogen facility in Hungary of exactly the same size.
Casale a South American business or a European
sorry,
business?
Thank you. Casale is a Swiss company.
Okay. Other questions, please? Yep, thank you.
A couple of questions. A short one, do many other companies do what you do, competitors? And secondly, sorry to bring his name into it again, he seems to be mentioned in everything, but Mr. Trump seems to be reducing green initiatives everywhere. Do you see that may have a significant reduction in demand for your products?
So, thank you. So I guess let's start with the last one. So interestingly enough, what we are seeing is Europe, and I should have mentioned it earlier, like Europe and the UK have added fertilizer imports to the carbon tax. And to give you a sense, 1 ton of fertilizer is about 1.8 tons of carbon. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we are being increasingly reliant on fertilizer imports from different places as we are shutting down in the UK and Europe plants. So we need to import it from somewhere. The initiative of President Trump is that he is reducing subsidies for basically green and blue, so things with carbon capture. So what we are seeing is a number of ammonia facilities, which is the base for fertilizer, are being delayed by 1 year or beyond. So all of these flows of supply, which were supposed to come to the US, are at big question. The Yara people who are taking all of the offtake, from their point of view, basically they're actually now in Washington, D.C., because already they've said we are going to delay our projects by 18 months, but they're not even sure if one of them is going to make it. So for them, as a supply point of view, it's a real issue. From our point of view, as I mentioned, we are competitive on gray, right? So our business is valid and is competitive on gray because we are in a place which today, to give you a sense, if I am buying fertilizer produced from Norway in France, the price of CAN is about $360 a ton. And most of the calcium nitrate fertilizer which makes it into Europe comes from that region. By the time that fertilizer, $360, makes it into Brazil, it costs around $400 a ton. By the time it goes through customs, transport, and so on, you're getting very quickly closer to 500, right? And so we've been very public about it. Our break-even cost, if we assume zero financing costs, just the cost of power and the cost of G&A, is closer to $200, right? So that was always the theme for us. The first one that will work is the one who can compete without subsidies, without carbon credit, without market creation. On the other one, from a competitor point of view, we were the first one to really identify this. And now we've got two players who are competing in the market officially. One is a company called Atlas Agro, which was created by the former CFO of Yara about 3 years ago with the backing of Macquarie. And they started with the first project in Washington State, because you have hydroelectric power and looking at the markets over there. And now it was extremely dependent on, indeed, the IRA green subsidies. And number two, it's in a market which is competing with gas, natural gas, cheap natural gas head-on. So there's a problem. But they're also developing something else in Brazil, pretty close to the coast. From our point of view, we are pretty agnostic about it because we are not competing in the same into a much bigger market. The second one is a company called fertiliser, Spanish company, backed by Heineken, Siemens, In Vivo, a trader, and they're developing their first project in France. And the difference between a project in Latin America and a project in France is that one takes 4 years to put together. The other one takes about 8 years with NIMBYism included, and a price of power, which is about 30% higher on a good day. So our point of view was always, yes, emerging markets are a bit harder, but they have a lot of advantages, right? So if you know how to develop projects in emerging markets, you can go a lot faster.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I had a question. You said at the start that you have the power already purchased. Or how far does that take you? Is that 1 year production, 2 years, 3 years?
Sorry, yes. So it's a long-term offtake contract. So clearly, if we have 15-year project finance, you need to basically have what we call is a 10 plus 10. So it's 20 years of power. And if you look in the public domain of ANDE, the national utility, as they put together, you see that you have the power allocated to Vieta over a long term. So you need that because you need also that predictability on power supply as well as price, right? And so that price is also the industrial tariff, which is pretty low. We're talking about $30 per megawatt. To give you a sense, at the moment in the UK, on a good day, we pay about $70 equivalent in change. And we've been a lot higher than that, and sometimes lower, but not all of the time.
And is your site close to the dam?
So our site is actually in the port of Vieta. And the reason we chose Vieta, it's basically the industrial port. It's the one which operates 24/7, 365 days a year. This is where all of the grain is exported and all of the fertilizer is imported. So it's a great logistics base. What we have done is our site is across a substation where we get the power directly. So obviously you have a network, but we only have basically 500 meters of cable to pull to get it's high voltage cable, I'm simplifying it. But we are basically close to power and close to logistics, which is also key in making sure, as I mentioned, how do you make sure that you are at a very low break even? Cost of power, logistics, what do you need to build, do you have access to water and so on.
And then the access to water was the other one. Where's the water coming from?
So it's coming straight, within the port area, so the Paraguay River. So we take 0.007% of the flow of the river, right? So we have inconsequential amount. Clearly, we take the water, we have to filter it, we have to demineralize it and hyper-treat it. That's about $3 million roughly just for the water treatment facility. But obviously, it's making sure that we control every single element of the value chain to keep the prices as low as possible.
Okay. Any other final questions for Olivier? Question here, please. Thanks, Steve.
Hello. The hydrogen is clearly a very important component of your process. What's the efficiency of the electrolyzer that converts the water to hydrogen, please?
So we are taking alkaline electrolyzers, right? So today you have 3 technologies of electrolyzers. Alkaline, which is the granddaddy, which has been going on for about 100 years. And so we're looking at about basically around 46% efficiency. So, generic alkaline electrolyzer with no bells and whistles, right? The fact that we are where we are and allows us not to be dependent on some of the supply chains. And even though we love, things that ITM has done, for example, the reality is they don't really offer better efficiency and their capex is a lot higher and the maintenance is a lot higher. So We are taking totally low risk, and we're just scaling up to a point which is very easy to deploy.
Okay. Thank you. We're out of time there. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for the presentation.